Hi friends, my name is host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People, and this video is going to be called What Happens When the World Ignores the Visionary and or an ENTP, okay? So, I've been watching uh, the saga of Tanya the Evil, which is an anime about a girl who's fighting for Germany, and it's set in World War One, but the storyline basically makes it World War Two. um, And it occurred to me, I actually started ideating out what would have happened if the Allies had listened to Churchill and finished the job, gotten rid of the Soviet Union, gotten rid of Stalin, eliminated the last bastion, big bastion of authoritarianism and evil manifest as a nation state that was left in the world. We had gotten rid of Germany's fascism, Italy's fascism, we'd gotten rid of Japan's imperialist uh, bullshit war culture, and all that was left was the bastion of communism called the Soviet Union. Churchill very much wanted, desperately wanted, the Allies to finish the job and knock off the Soviet Union and get rid of authoritarianism from the world. No, this is the same Churchill who was saying well before World War II, we've got to do something about Hitler. And was in the minority until Chamberlain's failure to attain obedience from an obviously evil and irrational authoritarian state, much to Chamberlain's surprise, apparently, uh, handed the keys to the country to Churchill appropriately. He was right about Hitler. History proved him right. Now, okay, you deal with it, Hitler. You deal with it, Churchill. It's the correct way to go, right? After the war, he was correct too. We need to go finish up the Soviet Union. And listen to what the world would be like if we had. If we had finished up the Soviet Union, there would have been no Cold War. There would have been no nuclear arms race. There would have been no Red China. Without the Soviet Union, Mao Zedong definitely wouldn't have successfully mounted a coup and overthrown the nationalist government and displaced them to Taiwan, which they now is be called Chinese Taipei because why? We didn't finish off the Soviet Union. Without China and the Soviet Union, there would be no Vietnam War. There'd be no whatever kind of government that is they have now in Vietnam, which is some sort of weird, arbitrary party ruled by committee kind of not sure what they are thing. There'd be no North Korea. There'd be no Cuba. There would have been no Bay of Pigs. There would have been no Cuban Missile Crisis. There'd be no above ground nuclear testing. There'd be substantially less nuclear waste and radiation. There would be no invasion of Ukraine. There would have been no Eastern Bloc states. There would have been no Berlin Wall, no East Germany, no Cambodia, no Laos. All of these things ensued from no South American communist insurgencies. All of these things ensued from our failure to knock off the Soviet Union we should have, which followed from nobody listened to even the ENTP, who was as empowered to speak and influence people as anybody could ever possibly hope to be, and should have been even more empowered with his history of being correct about what we should do in critical moments, right? And yet they did not listen to him. And so instead, we have this mess that we have currently. We've got this massive industrial military complex that was necessary, justified by, and the natural consequence of us having another superpower to be the enemy, right? We needed to be their enemy, obviously, Look at all the shit that happened because we weren't their enemy enough. So, also, I would point out the following. We have another example contemporaneous to ourselves. The ENTP, who was much less empowered to be heard than Churchill was prior to World War II, because Churchill didn't come out of nowhere, right? Namely, Eric, was 100% correct about COVID at the very beginning. Not about some vagaries about what we should do or specifically not do and why. And what would happen if we ignored Eric and chose to take that action anyway. And so here we are, we've got the whole world 10 to 15% poorer than it was prior to COVID. And that's averaging it out. It actually plays out like some people are 90% poorer, some people are not more poorer. But I mean, everybody's at least a little bit poor because of the inflationary impacts. Even they would have had to have gotten richer during a time when it was most difficult to get rich, and get richer beyond the rake, so to speak, which is the inflation is like the casino taking 10% of your pot or 15% of your pot, depending on what area of marketplace you're dealing with. Some places have not been impacted by the inflationary pressures, some kinds of things, and other kinds of things have been impacted a lot, right? So anyway, what happens when you don't listen to the guy who proved himself to be the visionary, Churchill, right? Before the war, during the war, and after the war? You choose not to listen to him anymore because you don't have an emergency that requires his specific vision to put out a fire, right? Or to deal with a fire. One interesting story about Churchill is that speech that we hear a recording of, "We will fight them on the beaches, we will fight them in the Mia." That was actually the second time he had given that speech. The first time he gave that speech was in a closed session of Parliament, and apparently was extremely fiery, impassioned, and it was like one of history's greatest oration moments, right? But then they asked him to do it again on the radio for the country. He didn't want to because he's like, you can't manufacture that kind of shit again. But they said, you got to do it. Come on, please. They said, okay, fine. But he did it all slow and flat like that because he wasn't naturally, authentically impassioned at the time. And yet, even so, people think of it as one of history's great speeches, even when he wasn't even trying to deliver it well. And not that he was trying in the first place either, right? He was authentically expressing what everybody should have been thinking. He felt it, right? As an ENTP, his feelings and his TI were very much linked. Like, he was known to go walk around London after bombings, tears openly streaming down his face, right? It was a very empowered and validated ENTP living as authentically as an ENTP can live, right? And because he was powerful before, it's like he came from connections and was in the mix of powerful people in England all along. But because of that, and because of the specific emergent problem, namely Hitler, he was actually able to gain power and successfully lead England through an incredibly trying period in their history because people listened to him. And then, as soon as they didn't desperately need a leader, they said, well, we don't need to listen to him anymore. And what's the consequence of not listening to him? This clusterfuck of contemporaneous world that we call the alternate history from the one in which Churchill was listened to when we got rid of the Soviet Union. All of these problems, the only kind of problems we still have without, regardless, would be problems with the Middle East. Because, yeah, if you go displace Palestinians and say, here, Jews have a country, you call it Israel, that's going to cause problems. If you say to all these various tribes in Iraq, we need a government that we can deal with so that we can get your oil from you, buy your oil so we don't just steal it from you, you know. And you Shiites, Sunnis, and Kurds, you're now all a country called Iraq. That's a bad, terrible idea. It's going to cause problems. But except for the challenges we have with the Middle East, maybe some of the challenges we have with Africa, we wouldn't be having any of the international problems we currently have if people had simply listened to Churchill. So next time there's something going on, and I say, this is what we definitely should or should not do, listen to me.